Good morning, Laredo. Welcome to 24/7 Laredo Talk Show. It's an original, free, and independent news and lifestyle channel dedicated to talk about the issues about Laredo and surrounding areas. Today we have a very special guest, but before we introduce him, I want to remind you, please press the like button on your Facebook page so we continue to give you shows like this. Judge, welcome to the show. This is Judge Danny Valdez, who's here. We haven't seen you for a while. I'm glad to see that you're here. You've been pretty busy out here.
Well, first of all, Judge, thank you very much for, if anything, developing this forum. I think it's important for the community to be able to hear and see us, and get to know a little bit more about us. And I want to thank you for doing that. I've kept up with the program, and I think you have really good guests and really good response and comments.
I want to let the public know that Judge Valdez and I worked for many years, a few years ago. And so I was always grateful for all the advice that he gave and all the work that we worked really good. And I'm glad to see you. Now you were a judge for more than 30 years, Judge. How many years were you a judge?
Actually, 32 years. Judge.
32 years you were in the county.
In the county, I ran for office in 1982.
Right.
Took office in 1983, and spent 32 years in the county.
So you pretty much knew the ins and the outs of the county over that course of the time period, pretty much.
Well, I can tell you that I've seen the growth, and I've seen the problems that come with growth.
Right.
When I ran in 82, the population was about 75,000.
So today is more than 250,000.
Yeah.
So it has changed. But you started now as, other than after working for Pretrial Services Department, you first ran back in
82.
82, excuse me. And you ran for Justice of the Peace. And you replaced a long-term judge who was there, was a judge...
Judge Alvarado.
Judge Alvarado, who was a judge for more than close to 40 years, it seems.
Right.
And so here comes the young person. You must have been in your, I don't know what age you were, but you certainly were a big difference for Judge Alvarado
back then. Because I was 27. First of all, I served in the Navy for 4 years. So I served, I was honorably discharged in 77. And then I ran for office in 1982. I was 27.
27 years
old. When I ran
old.
for office. I was 28 when I took office. So back then, I was one of the youngest justices of the peace in the state of Texas.
Yeah. So, and I remember when you ran the first time, Judge, you ran against pretty much the whole machinery back then because you were not an attorney and the whole legal bar was supporting your opponent, plus all the people involved in the establishment were involved against you as well. But you pulled it off. Well,
it was one of those, we're grassroots campaigners, judges, if you can remember that.
Yes.
I come from a family that's been, for many years, involved in the political arena.
Right.
My father was an activist.
Right.
Eliseo Valdez Sr. was an activist for the right reasons.
Right.
Always trying to help the working people. He was very involved with the union. So
actually, he was involved with the union. So he sort of, was he like your mentor, it seems to be?
We were, myself and my brother Eliseo.
Right.
My brother Eliseo was a councilman also for 8 years here. We would tag along with him. We were young, we were small, but we would always tag along with him because he was always working to help establish unions and the working people. So we were around that environment.
He was not the most popular person around.
Well, he was
with obviously the establishment, but he obviously was able to turn around many of the workers into the unions and improve their own personal lives.
I can share a story, Judge, that he was the first one that organized a strike against Coca-Cola. Way back then in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, to be able to get better wages for the working people. So we were always around that environment of helping out. So, it's in our blood, I guess,
Right.
But
so does that mean, I would imagine that's what sparked your interest in government?
It originated with my family and getting involved and helping out. And being able to be in a position to be able to make a difference in the lives of people. So it was always about that. It's always been about that.
Right.
It's never been about titles. It's never been about prestige or anything of a position. It's always been how can we impact lives in a broader sense. So that's how I came up. I come from the west side of Laredo, one of the poorest areas of Laredo. But again, we were always around that environment, and that's what it sparked me to get into.
So you became a judge back in 1982 or so.
Correct.
Basically. And you were a JP for at least, how many years? Judge?
24.
24 years. During that period of time, obviously you saw a lot of things happen with the growth, like you said, about Laredo and Webb County, and of course you saw a lot of the youth with drug issues and other problems that they were going through. Obviously, I was an observer and participating part with you, but what to you were the biggest issues back in the 80s and 90s as it dealt with the youth?
I can share a story with you, Judge. I'm full of stories, you can imagine, in 32 years. But this particular story impacted my life so much that I changed my ways of how I dealt with cases in the court. And, this particular, back then in the early 80s, 82, 83, we didn't have alternative schools like we have now. It was mainly, talking to parents and kids, from the bench.
Right.
And this particular student, well, he was probably about 8 years old. He was a disruptive, truancy, chronic, really one of those kids that was just headed in the wrong direction. And he came from a broken home. The dad was the guardian of 6 kids at home. And, they took him to court. And, just talking to him, he would get up in the morning, he would start drinking. That was his way of not dealing with the issues at home with the kids. So they took him to court. And, I really was just starting. I was 28, 29. Right. So I was just talking to him, telling him, look, you need to stop drinking, pay attention to your son. He's 8 years old. He's already messing around with drugs, with gangs back then. So what I want you to do is get up in the morning, don't drink. Just take him to school and leave him in the classroom. And you've done your job. That's all I'm asking you to do. So send him home. Following year, who's back? The little boy, he was 9 years old. He was already heavy into drugs, heavy into gangs. And I told him right then in the court, I said, sir, you need to stop drinking and pay attention to your son. He's going to end up dead. He's going to end up killing somebody, or he's going to end up in detention. Again, he didn't listen to me. I get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, Judge, to go pronounce somebody dead. As I was back then, we were the coroners.
There was no coroner back in
Right.
the 80s. There was the JPs people were called. The police department would call you and you go and pronounce somebody dead.
So I ended up walking into the Old Mercy Hospital, the emergency room, and the dad was outside. And he comes up to me and he starts crying and he hugs me and says, Judge, I should have listened to you. I said, what happened, sir? I said, they just found my son with a gunshot wound to the head. And I said, well, then I started to second guess myself. I started to say, maybe I didn't do enough. Maybe I should have done more. We didn't have a lot of options back then. And if you remember, Judge, we started to talk about alternative schools, options. And my good friend, Mr. Romeo Rodriguez.
Vidal, right?
Yeah, we Vidal Trevino, and we started to talk about developing options, alternatives to just talking to the kids, the parents. I changed the way I approached things, the way I dealt with kids, the way I dealt with families, because I carried him with me.
Yes.
And he was not the only one. Through my tenure, I had to go and.
I agree, because I was your counterpart, so I saw you deal with a lot of young people who were confused, had a lot of issues at home. Obviously, we're not going to school, and you were actually very proactive in some of the programs that you started.
And the reason I did that, Judge, is because you're a judge. You were a judge, and you knew that, that it's very easy to judge from the bench.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I wanted to do was, why is he before me? So I would make an effort to go to the house, to see the home environment, and then you realize, now I know why he's here before me. You have a family of 6 or 7 or 8 in a 2-bedroom house. The home environment is not there. So, it took a lot, but it had to be done that way. So gradually through the years, we were able to develop alternatives, options.
Yes.
And
I still remember, Judge, when we were both called in by one of the administrators of the school districts, because you decided, or I don't know who decided, but we decided to give some things for perfect attendance.
Right.
Bicycles and a dance, free hot dogs.
Pizza parties.
Yeah, pizza parties for kids. And that was not what was done back then in the 80s. And we were called in, and we were literally scolded by certain people that was completely. Back then, the school districts did not want to take any help from the public. They were seen as a negative. And of course, you developed the plans, and they had no choice but to accept them.
And we were always looking at how do we impact lives?
That's
because
right.
we dealt with those families, with those kids in the courtroom. And I remember we were chastised in front of administrators, and because we were doing things that were not the norm, you know. But for us, it's, you know, we dealt with death, we dealt
Right.
with issues, we dealt with the drug problems. So we were always looking for options.
Right.
But again, I think they finally realized that, you know, we meant well,
Right, it
and
was
we
always
wanted
right.
to help out.
Well, one thing certainly in the JP level, I think even today, the justice of peace are at the forefront of a lot of the social ills that are occurring in our community. And you were certainly one of the ones who introduced several programs. One of the programs that I remember you started was that the school district decided to assign an employee at the judge's office
Right.
to be able to work on the truancy cases, to move the cases faster. Back then, you were handling over 100 cases a week.
It was
Truancy
a
cases.
liaison
Right.
between the school districts and the courts to be able to have that person say,
Right.
you know, this is what the courts are doing.
Right.
And we need to continue to do that.
Right.
So we developed that. I also had this program where we would bring, remember, the inmates
Right.
from TDC, from the penitentiary to come and talk to the kids. We developed the youth conference for
Right.
kids, always doing different things because we were in the forefront, like you're saying. We were in the forefront of dealing with these issues and real life issues.
Real life issues, because not to take anything away from any of the other judges, because they all are dealing with different issues. But the justices of the peace are really technically dealing with the issues up front, because they see people getting arrested on a daily basis. They see people dying on a daily basis. They see people not going to school, having small issues that really are big issues for them.
Right.
So I saw that pretty much, and you were definitely one of the ones who was leading the charge.
And I think that, you know, I started, and I always say we because, I mean, I always want to include, because everybody, the judges that came in, they followed our projects, our programs, and you certainly were one of them. I remember Judge Liendo, Judge Vasquez, all these judges came in, and they started to develop these programs because they realized that, you know, it's about impacting lives and helping these kids to eventually graduate. And I'm full of stories. Somebody told me, Judge, you should write a book about things that you see, things that you saw, or things that you dealt with. But again, it's just through the years, I know that we've impacted lives. We've had kids eventually graduate, but we've also lost some along the way, either through drug abuse, through violence, or whatever. So, you know, it was interesting, very interesting, but I know that we helped more kids out than we did not.
That's right. Which programs do you think, or do you have a particular program that stands out to you when you were at JP?
As far as the impact of the kids,
Yes.
bringing the inmates from TDC, Judge, to be able to hear the mistakes that they made and trying to encourage the kids to say, look, don't make the mistakes that I did or that I made. Look where I'm at. I'm in prison. I mean, we would take them to the high schools, and that impacted a lot of lives.
I think to some degree that program was the start of the courts in schools. Now they have judges going to the schools and having court and things like that. But the original hearings back then was really these prisoners coming to the schools. Again, back in the 80s and 90s, the school districts didn't want to get any help from anyone.
Right.
And so you sort of led the way in opening those doors and working with.
And I think they finally realized that, you know, the impact,
Right.
or that when they see the graduation, especially the truancy. Because remember, the schools get funding.
Right.
They get funding from the state for every day that the students in class. So they saw the difference, that the money that they were losing when kids were not going to school, the money that the state was not, that they were not getting from the state because of the truancy. So the fact that we had kids going to school, the fact that they were receiving these monies from the state, it also impacted the school district.
Right.
So they realized, look, we need to support the judges. We need to make sure that the programs or the projects that they have, you know, that we help them out. Because again, it also impacted the school district.
And that's what started, these programs began then, the partnerships of the judges and the school districts.
Correct.
Back in the 80s, 90s. That was the start of that. Nowadays, they have courts in schools and they have other projects in the schools. But you go back to the initial stage, and that was when you literally were brought into the administrators. But things have changed. Gracias a Dios. Thank you, Judge, for being here. I want to let the public know, please continue to stay involved, running for office, or in fact, registering to vote and voting, or just get involved with your church. Get involved. Be a part of the community.